Without keeping our viewers waiting, let's hear about what stock markets have in store for us. So over to you, Nilesh and Subbu.
Thank you, Ghazal, for the introduction and welcome everyone for this webinar. Nilesh, can you just run the PPT for me? So by way of background, as you know that when we began the year 2020, we already knew the possible impact of COVID. It was already spreading in China, and we knew that it may come to India as well. But we reacted a little slow as a country, and the lockdown was announced in March. But it was announced, it was one of the strictest lockdowns, and as you can see over here, based on the research by Oxford University, where they had looked at the stringency of the lockdown, and they definitely rate India and South Africa had the strictest lockdown when it was announced in March. Now, what it means is, of course, it will have an implication, but from whether the lockdown was successful in controlling the COVID, it doesn't look so, as you can see in the next slide. While we had the strict lockdown, the number of cases actually continued to increase. Now, the rate of growth could be different, but the fact is that COVID cases increased quite rapidly. Now, between the actual number of cases and the confirmed cases, there is a difference. The number of confirmed cases is lower than the actual cases, and possible reason could be the limited testing. But the fact is, despite the lockdown, we had the COVID cases increasing. Go to the next slide. While the initial cases were in the large urban cities, in fact, one of the data points suggested that close to 66% were in the five large cities. Later on, as the migrant laborers moved back to their rural hometowns, we saw COVID spreading. So on this slide, as you can see, the first million cases or the next to 1 to 2 million cases and beyond 2 million cases, the right hand side, you can see the population increasing. And the right hand side is all reflecting rural districts and smaller towns. So from what was largely an urban problem, we have now seen the spread increasing to rural towns as well. Now, the lockdown had an impact on the economy, and because it was a very severe lockdown, it also had a very severe impact on the GDP growth. As you can see over here, based on what Wall Street Journal had pulled out, across the world, GDP growth has declined. But India, it declined very, very rapidly because of the strictness or the stringency at which the lockdown was imposed. We declined in the last quarter close to around 23.9%. Go to the next. So the Indian economy, declined by 23.9%, and it was already on a weak footing. So if you see from 2016, India was impacted by the demonetization and subsequently by the GST implementation and later on by the ILFS crisis, which had an impact on credit market and therefore impact on the economy as well. However, while the rate of growth was declining, it was still positive. But with the lockdown, it went into the negative territory, and in the most recent numbers declared, India declined by 23.9%. Uh, as a response to this lockdown, as a response to possible slowdown, the government did announce quite a few measures. But if you look very carefully at those measures, although it is 1.8% of GDP, a significant amount from that announcement is actually more of providing liquidity, whether it is to the medium and small enterprises or providing liquidity for some schemes, because there was nothing really to stimulate the demand. So overall package seems to be large. I think it is around 21.8 trillion. But as I said, this good amount of that was actually just providing liquidity and very little in terms of actually replacing the losses which people had or replacing the loss of income which people had. And therefore its impact on demand will be very, very limited. Uh, Although it has spent and announced quite a large amount, we expect it to continue with some more measures. They have already done that in schemes like Narega, where for this year, I think close to 1 trillion rupees have been announced. As you know, that many migrants moved from urban India back to rural India, and they needed to be provided jobs, and Narega was one of the means by which that could be done. So it is quite possible that while the initial announcements, whatever they have made, were liquidity driven, but it is possible that going forward they may announce some more schemes or some more measures which could help in demand creation. But as of now, there is no evidence of it. This is just a hope, and let us see whether they actually make any announcements going forward. Now, what does decline in GDP mean? If you really look at the real GDP, which is expected to decline by 10% on an overall annual year, while it has declined by 23.9% for the quarter, but the economy has been opened up, economic activity has really picked up. Many companies are saying that they are operating now at 80% of the pre-COVID levels. So all of that will mean for the next 3 quarters there will be growth. And for the year overall, we expect around 10% real GDP decline. And what it means is essentially, from a real GDP perspective, from all the production perspective, India will probably go back to where it was in 2018. So whether you look at cement production, steel production, coal, fertilizer, traffic, all of that will probably go very close to FY18. There will be some industry specific issues which may result in a difference. For instance, if you look at two-wheeler sales, probably because of the hit on incomes and the fact that people are not willing to spend, you may see a lower sales than what it was in FY18. But by and large, most industries will probably reflect very close to what we were in FY18. On a nominal basis, India would go back to FY19. The nominal GDP takes into account the inflation as well. So therefore, based on the fact that real GDP plus inflation, our numbers would be very close to where we were in FY19. However, if you look at the details, it will have a major shift in many items. For instance, in FY21, the unemployment rate will be far higher than it was in FY19. If you look at the credit growth, it is really half of what it was in FY19. Bank non-performing loans will be significantly higher. And of course, fiscal deficit, given the need that the government has to spend, has to increase the demand, will be a lot higher than where it was in 2019. Now, each of these will have a different implication. A higher fiscal deficit may mean that borrowing costs could go up because the government also will be borrowing. It could also mean that India might see a higher inflation. Bank non-performing loans may limit the credit growth, and that will have an impact on future growth of corporates. It will also means that capital may have to be raised. So while everyone will respond, the response will be very different. Corporates will respond by, cutting down costs, ensuring that their profits are maintained, because the demand isn't really picking up so rapidly. While from a government point of view, where they spend, how they spend will have a huge implication going forward. Also, the kind of spending in what areas they would like to spend are something which we need to watch out for. And where it traditionally spent on, say, infra, we may have to spend now on many other things, including in the social sector. Some of the broad changes triggered by COVID, the most clear one was the impact on migrant laborers and the impact on the informal smaller sectors where the hit by COVID has been quite severe. This also means that there is a risk of social unrest. While all this was going on, India also passed some labor bills. The impact of it is still to be fully understood. So it is possible that some of these issues may result in some social unrest. Industry consolidation will pick up. You may see a lot of mergers and acquisitions because smaller companies have been disproportionately hit. Digital spend will increase because in every area, whether you look at finance, whether you look at education, everything is being done online. So definitely there is going to be a lot more spend on digital uh, areas by the companies. And the real estate needs, commercial and real estate would also change. Given the fact that now people are comfortable working from home, people are able to deliver whatever they want by working from home, the need for large office space may be questionable, and you may therefore see some amount of changes. You may see companies adopting smaller offices with less number of people in order to maintain social distancing, in order to avoid travel, and that will have an impact on commercial space, real retail space. You are already witnessing that in some cities. For instance, in Chennai, there was a large IT company which was into products. They really moved lock, stock, and barrel to almost, I would say, rural Tamil Nadu. And they are saying that they are able to operate from there because they are able to get engineers, they are able to have a better lifestyle, and they are able to deliver because telecom facilities are available across the country. So you may see certain of these changes coming in going forward. The spend on healthcare will have to increase because what we have really seen from COVID is our healthcare systems have been very weak, and it's quite possible that the government may spend a lot more on healthcare. And since the things like Narega tends to benefit rural India, you may also find the government come up with some scheme in order to help address the employment in urban cities as well. And that could be triggered or that could be facilitated by a higher spend on healthcare. Again, these are nothing has been announced based on the facts, based on the data which we are reading. We are expecting that the spend on healthcare will increase. Some of the other trends which I shared with you. There would also be a need to raise capital, mainly by banks and non-banking financial institutions. And as you can see over here, given the fact that huge amount of liquidity is available, whether globally or within India, many companies were able to raise close to $18 billion have been raised since April 2020. Lot of private equity deals have taken place, close to $16.8 billion, mergers and acquisitions of around $19 billion. So these are large sums of money facilitated by the easy availability of liquidity, plus the fact that the capital is needed and people who have a long-term view are willing to take that risk. The next slide, if you look at the private equity flows, a significant amount of them has gone into telecom. As you must have read, a large portion of that is because of the announcements by Reliance Jio, but other sectors as well has seen some amount of flows. And we could expect the private equity players to be very active in the mergers and acquisition space across different kind of businesses, because business models will also undergo a significant change. These are just some of the thoughts on COVID and COVID related impact on industry, on the broader economy. We could come back to you. I will come back to you when the question and answer session begins, but Nilesh will take you through the impact of all of this on stock markets. Nilesh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Subbu. Now, Subbu laid out the impact of COVID and what kind of sort of changes that can come because of the COVID phenomena. Now, let's look at how the markets have reacted in this entire process. As you know, there's been a sharp bounce. So there was a big crack by the end of March, and from April, we started recovering. And now we are almost back to 52-week highs. We are roughly about 10-11% away as on date from the 52-week high that we made in the month of Jan. So there has been a sharp V-shaped recovery in the markets. Apart from the fact that the economy has not recovered that much, the economy still remains far below its normalized levels. So, I mean, the question is, have the markets run ahead of themselves? The strange thing about the rally is when you look at the sharp bounce, almost three stocks account for 42% of the gain in the BSE 30. One was Reliance, which has a very large weight now, almost 16% of the benchmark. The other was Infosys, and the third was HDFC Bank. So apart from that, when you look at the broader indices, be it BSE 200 or even larger indices like BSE 500, a majority of stocks are almost close to 20% away or more than that from the 52-week high. When we last looked at the data, almost 47% of the stocks in the BSE 200 were more than 20% away from the 52-week high. So there is value outside of the narrow index. So even though the narrow index is very close to all-time highs, a lot of the stocks across the broader indices are fairly distant from their 52-week high. So of course, the BSE 30 now shows that valuations are fairly high. Now there's a problem because the Q1 earnings were sharply impacted because of the lockdown, and it's a trailing 12-month earning number that is used to calculate the price earnings ratio. There's a sharp spike. But even adjusting for that, if you look at the earnings as on March 30th or March 31st for the last 4 quarters, and if you try to calculate the price earnings ratio for that, then even then the price earnings ratio look fairly elevated. It's almost 25 times. So it is not that the markets are cheap. As the earnings sort of keep coming for the next 4 quarters, it might the P number will keep rising, But even adjusting for that, it is not a cheap market at the moment. It is a fairly expensive market. The small and mid cap index and the stocks had a huge rally, which ran up, which started somewhere in 2013 and peaked somewhere in early 2018. And since then, they've corrected quite sharply. Even though they're fairly elevated even today, almost 30 times, but not as expensive as we've seen them in the recent history. At least they are reflecting the kind of fundamentals which are there in the stock. They are not showing a massive re-rating in terms of valuations. So a lot of the money is actually just gone to the larger names, suggesting the kind of theme that Subbu suggested, where people believe there will be industry consolidation. So larger players will get larger, and smaller players might struggle to survive in this environment. Of course, one of the big game changers that has happened since 2014 has been the comeback of the retail investors in India. Unfortunately, a lot of that money has come into the market when the earnings power has not been that great. So that has led to a massive re-rating in the price earnings ratio for the companies in general and for the broader market. When we did the analysis, a lot of this money that has come in has not made returns to justify allocating to equities. They've been low double-digit number between 10 and 15% over sort of 2-year, 3-year periods. So it's not justified the premium that is required from equities. So hence you're seeing now some outflows coming through. Now we had something similar pre-Lehman, where a lot of retail investors came into the market, and once there was a big crack, for a long period of time, they kept on withdrawing from the market. We are seeing early signs of people getting more risk averse from equity markets and withdrawing from the market. We're not sure how much that will sustain. There is a long-term story where people are under allocated to equities in India, and long-term money or allocation to equities is expected to pick up. But money that has come in the recent years chasing momentum and returns, because they've seen a large crack in the investments, as soon as they see some sort of gain and getting back to the cost, you might see withdrawals. And I think that is what you're seeing right now in equity markets. Of course, foreign capital, we saw a big outflow in the month of March, almost $8 billion. But we are seeing again money coming back into the markets, and in the month of August, we almost had $6 billion come back into the markets. So if you see retail investors withdrawing from the markets, the foreign capital that is coming back might just still support the market. And again, this is driven by cheap capital around the world. Interest rates around the world are close to zero. Most governments have pumped in a lot of money in the local market and stimulated the local markets so that GDP contraction is a lot lower. But that money is seeking new asset classes, and emerging markets have always been one of the favorites, and India has been a long-term structural story. So even though the economy remains weak and the earnings environment remains weak, you see a lot of that money coming into markets like India and propping up asset prices. This has been the sort of long-term trend of flows. Foreigners have always loved India, and you've always had a fairly decent allocation of money to India. Last few years, it's been the retail investors that has really picked up, but it looks like again you might see a very low number this year, or even might see a net outflow number this year. But you have foreigners to support that local market, or at least the Indian market, with the kind of money that they are pumping in. Again, this is in the backdrop where the earnings environment is very, very weak. We've had roughly almost very low single digits or even less than 5% CAGR earnings growth for the last 5 years. Now, this was the earnings estimate for FY20. Actually, because Bloomberg ends the earnings estimates in March, and earnings keep coming in April, May for the previous financial year. Actual numbers are even lower than the numbers that are being shown here. And there has been a sharp correction in earning estimates once the COVID crisis hit. Like Subbu suggested, companies might get back to their FY18 levels in terms of physical output of products. And I won't be surprised if the earnings number starts reflecting that for FY21. And the FY22 and 23 earnings, there is downside risk to that as well, as the economy, because the pandemic has prolonged for so long. I mean, we are not sure when the vaccine might come. You might have weak earnings in FY23, 22 and 23 earnings compared to what is being projected here. And in this environment, all that money coming in is just propping up price to earnings ratio. So net, the markets are expensive. They are not that cheap relative to the earnings environment that we are seeing right now. Last few years, the banking system NPAs, as India went through a large cleanup cycle and banks were provisioning for their non-performing assets, their profitability was very low, which kept the earnings number quite suppressed. There is an assumption that their earnings will rebound in FY22 and 23, This was before the COVID pandemic. Our sense is as new NPA creation happens, perhaps there is a downside risk to those numbers as well. And you might see those numbers being cut as banks start providing more for the risk of stress that gets built up because of COVID. But right now, if you look at the numbers, there's a large rebound expected in FY22 and 23. A lot of it driven by banking sector provisioning getting lower as they clean up most of their NPAs. So net, if you look at the equity markets and where they're positioned right now, there has been a rally, but it's been a very concentrated rally. There are opportunities beyond the index. There are some stocks which are 20-30% away from their 52-week high. So for a portfolio manager, there are opportunities where he can build portfolios looking at these stocks. But purely the index is not that attractive if you want to look at it from a return generation perspective. See, there is a long-term outlook which remains fairly attractive for Indian equities. But because there's been a sharp rally in an environment where earnings will remain weak, there is a downside risk to the current market. We saw a bit of that in the month of September where equity markets started giving way. But again, in the last few days, you're seeing a rebound in the markets. But just the way the markets are positioned with very weak earnings potential and a fairly high multiple, you have a slightly higher downside risk at the moment. So it is not the time for investors to go overweight on equities. If you have your equity allocation, you can continue to hold it. But broadly, if you want to make large lump sum allocation, you might want to stagger it over a period of time. Perhaps put 75% now, and the balance, if the market's correct, you add that in to average down your cost of investments, assuming that there could be some downside risk to the markets. FI flows have been fairly strong in the month of August. And they might remain strong given the low interest rate environment and the kind of money that is being pumped in. And they might cushion some of the impact that you see from retail investors who are withdrawing from the market. So this is sort of the short-term outlook on the market in the way where the markets are positioned in terms of earnings outlook, flows, and valuations. Now, just to see where the long-term story is headed, I'll just hand it back to Subbu, who can take it forward from here. Subbu, over to you.
Thank you, Nilesh. Go to the next slide. So our long-term thesis we continue to believe that India has the potential to grow at that 6.5. Of course, currently now for the next 3 years, we think India will grow at a lower rate, probably at around 5.5. And then assuming that we put in place certain systems, certain spending, certain expenditure on say infrastructure, which will give boost to the corporate India to start spending on capex. We could see the growth rate heading back to around 6.5%. And the reason for that is, of course, we didn't have a COVID-like impact in the past, but India had different challenges, whether it was war, whether it was fight with Pakistan, China, whether it was oil, high prices, low prices. And even if you look at the SARS-related event, which was not as large as COVID, but very similar to that, India still managed to grow. So while the next 2 to 3 years could be stressful, the longer term potential still looks good, and we believe that we could be headed towards that. Go to the next slide. You look at any consumption basket within India, given the huge under-penetration, all of this will see a growth. Whether it is two-wheelers, which is again driven by the fact that people's income will slowly start to rise, and they will need a vehicle to move around. The fact that public transportation system is still very weak in many places, all of that will mean that two-wheeler demand could be quite robust going forward. And then across board, whether you look at passenger vehicles, whether you look at cement, refrigerators, home and home loans are outstanding, there is definitely going to be a demand. We will have crisis, but as we come back out of the crisis, we will see the demand picking up. The pickup could be much more rapid if the government spend is adequate and well directed. Then definitely the pickup could be sharper. If it is not well directed, then it will take time, but eventually I think that growth rates will come back. India is also not really dependent on the Western world or export market. Our export to GDP is quite low compared to say some of the other countries. So we are largely a domestic consumption country. So as long as we address that and we create demand, the growth rates for the long run will come. Now, the near-term earnings, there will be a stress, as Nilesh had pointed out, that the earnings growth for the next 1 year definitely will be lower. But if you look at the trajectory over long periods of time, taking over here right from calendar year 98, there has been a growth. There will be periods when some issue or the other will crop up, and that will have an impact on the near-term earnings. But over long periods of time, we will see the earnings growth pick up. And if you take the consensus EPS and then multiply it by the long-term average P multiple, which is roughly around, I think, 18 to 19 times, there is still an upside for the index. However, this is never a straight line. There will always be a down period. It will run up for some time, then there will be a correction, and then it will eventually reflect that. As you can see again over here, if you were to normalize it based on both the earnings as well as index starting from 100, they pretty much catch up. There are times when earnings will lag. There are times when the index will lag, but eventually they tend to catch up and reflect the earnings growth. Yeah, so these will have an impact on the quantum long-term value fund. Dilesh, do you want to go through the portfolio?
So as, I mean, in the near term, we are sort of slightly cautious, but the valuation correction has allowed us to buy very high quality stocks at valuations we have not seen for many years now, almost 7-8 years. Now, when the markets corrected quite sharply in the month of March, what we did was we first went and did a stress analysis of our portfolio. We wanted to ensure that we don't have any risks in our portfolio, and we wanted to own companies which can survive the downturn. So we took the fixed costs of the portfolio companies and what kind of cash were they carrying on their books. And in most of the cases, we noticed these companies can survive almost a year without having to resort to borrowing. And most of them were fairly low leveraged. And even if they were high leveraged, they were backed by very strong parents like the Tatas if they wanted to have access to cash flows. So in that sense, we were very comfortable with the portfolio that we had. And plus the correction in valuation allowed us to add similar companies to the portfolio at valuations we have not seen for a long period of time. So again, these are companies which have a very dominant position in the markets that they operate, very high quality of management, very clean balance sheets, and large net cash positions. So we added almost 4 new stocks to the portfolio, which is why the portfolio has done well over the last 5-6 months, despite not owning Reliance in the portfolio, which has been the dominant feature in the market rally. Now we have a slightly higher weight in financials and consumer discretionary because valuations came off very, very sharply in that bucket, fearing that demand will get impacted as well as financials will have higher NPAs. But when you look at the valuations, and again, there was a penchant to move towards adding companies which are relatively safe in the sector. We got to add high quality private sector banks as well as consumer discretionary names which are high net cash who can survive this downturn and again get stronger as the economy opens up. Now, so we are fairly comfortable in the way the portfolio is positioned and the kind of companies that we have in the portfolio. There were certain sectors where we resized the weights, looking at either the risk that they were carrying, where we felt that given the near-term outlook of demand, perhaps we should not have such large weights in the sector, or we took advantage of the sharp rebound in select stocks where we decided to book profits, where we felt the stocks had run ahead of the fundamentals and the weights were now getting larger in the portfolio. So in certain sectors, we resize weights looking at these two sort of parameters. Apart from that, we are sitting on cash. If the markets were to correct, we will add more names because we believe that there is a sort of recovery on the anvil over the next 2-3 years. So there could be near-term problems, but in the next 2-3 years, like Subbu suggested, we expect demand to come back, which is what we see historically. You look at penetration levels across most categories. India remains highly an underpenetrated economy, and as sort of things open up, even if the governments have not done much, we expect the natural cycle to catch up. And as companies start hitting 80-85% of capacity utilization, we will start the next leg of capex. So we are fairly bullish over slightly medium-term outlook, and the portfolio is positioned for that. And we have a higher weight in financials and consumer discretionary, where we believe these are the sectors that will lead the recovery once valuations pick up. Now, what are the risks to our portfolio positioning? Now, given that we are positioned for an economic recovery, any kind of delay to that will sort of play adverse or be adverse to our positioning. Now, as Subbu suggested, there has been a big hit on the informal sector as well as migrant labor, and they have almost had 6 months of no income. And if that triggers some sort of unrest in the migrant labor market, and you're also seeing job losses in the formal sector as well, you might see a delay in the recovery. Because COVID is an unknown and you're seeing extension of lockdown, and globally you're seeing a second wave coming back, and Europe is again going to a phase of lockdowns. If that happens, again, the recovery could be delayed. We are not sure how the consumer psyche gets impacted by the lower income. People might choose to save more and spend less in this environment of uncertainty. So again, that might mean that consumer discretionary spends could be lower, which might impact some of our consumer discretionary names that we are holding in the portfolio. Because we don't own Reliance, which is now almost 16% of the larger benchmark and almost 10% of the BSE 200, and that has led the rally, we will underperform if Reliance continues to rally, because we've never not owned it for a variety of reasons since our inception of the fund. If the markets continue to rally and the economic environment continues to remain weak, we will continue to trim and exit names from the portfolio, which means that cash will increase in the fund, which might act as a drag near term in the portfolio. But we'd rather book profits in the environment rather than keep allocating money to stocks where we think they've run ahead of fundamentals. And these are the reasons why we could relatively underperform if markets were to continue to rally. Now, it is a value fund and it must reflect the characteristics of a value fund. So if you look at our portfolio weighted average dividend yield or even price to earnings ratio relative to the BSE 30, it is showing that it is far cheaper and the dividend yield is far higher compared to the BSE 30. So it reflects the characteristics of a value fund. Again, these are not our earnings. What we've done is we've taken the portfolio companies, taken the Bloomberg consensus estimates on these earnings and calculated these numbers. So the portfolio is, at least the price to earnings ratio suggests that if the markets were to correct, it should correct a lot less, given that there is a valuation buffer in the companies that we own. So hopefully the stocks that we've built and the valuations that we have for these companies, they should do really well over the next 2-3 years and protect us if the markets were to correct in the downturn. Now, value style has underperformed over the last decade. The last time it did well was in the decade of 2000 to 2010. It typically tends to do well when the economy cycle turns. So we are in a phase where the economy has had a very bad downturn in India for the last 4-5 years. Perhaps this year could be the bottom in terms of the economic outlook, and then you could have a turn in the economy cycle. Typically, value managers will not own high-end technology stocks, which have been the leaders in sort of the West. So this is a chart from The Economist, which pulled out data on value investing. Now, the FANG stocks there have led the rally, which most value managers will not own. Similarly, high growth or relatively faster growing stocks have led the rally in India. But when this cycle turns, you see the cyclicals doing a lot better, which is what value managers typically own. And they tend to lead the rally, which is what we saw in this decade of 2000 to 2010. If that similar phase were to come back again, as the economy turns, you will again see value strategy outperforming. So at least the setup is there for value style to start outperforming as the cycle turns. And we are sort of firmly in the value bucket based on the characteristics that I showed you. Now, our advice has always been that each style does well in a particular kind of market. So even though we believe value style will do well over the next decade, but you should not have more than 20% in one particular style. So our advice to investors has always been to have 20% in the quantum long-term equity value fund and the balance 80% in quantum equity fund of funds, so that you get a variety of styles in your basket. The reason for that is, and I'll show you the returns, when one style does not do well, the other does well, you get a balanced return profile. You don't get the sharp up and down return profile that you get once you are allocated to a certain style. So like last 1 year, the quantum long-term equity value fund did not do that well, but the quantum equity fund of fund did relatively well. So if you are running an 80-20 strategy, you would still make a positive return with a relatively lower sort of standard deviation or drawdown than you would have experienced if you were just allocated to quantum long-term equity value fund. So for investors, our advice has always been that please diversify yourself, have 5-6 different funds. If you can choose the funds on your own, it is great. Or a single product quantum equity fund of fund, which has allocation to 6 different funds representing diverse styles. So 80% of that and 20% to quantum long-term equity value fund complete your investment basket with a lot less volatility than being exposed to just one particular style. This is sort of the money if you were to allocate how the 10,000 rupees would have grown. So that's sort of the end of our presentation. We'll open it up for Q&A. Ghazal, over to you.
Thanks, Nilesh. Thanks, Subbu, for that detailed presentation. I'm sure our viewers found those insights on the economy and stock markets really helpful. We have some questions that have come in for you, so let's get started with those. I'll start with you, Nilesh. Nilesh, what would you say are the expected index levels over the next 6 months based on the macroeconomic data?
Yeah, so like we showed in our presentation, purely the index has reached a level where you're worried about whether it's reflecting underlying fundamentals. Given how sharp the rally is, we've rebounded almost 50% from the low, while the earnings are contracting quite sharply, it suggests there is not much value left in the index. So our sense is you could have flattish returns or even slightly negative returns if your horizon is 6 months. But slightly longer term, you might still make decent returns because a lot of the stocks are not reflecting what the index is reflecting. A lot of the stocks are 20%, 30% away from the 52 high. So it could be that the index does not give you decent returns, but portfolios might still generate your long-term equity returns or slightly lower than that. But the index might not. So my advice to investors would be perhaps indexing might not give you the kind of returns that you've seen over the last 2-3 years, but individual portfolios and individual funds might start to give you better returns because they are holding companies which have not run up so well.
All right, thanks. So, how do you think the government could have better strategized and implemented a more robust relief package which could have helped the overall economy?
Yeah, so part of the problem, as I said, the announcements have been more to provide liquidity. What we really need is something to stimulate demand. Now that could come either by giving tax reliefs, which will give people more money in their hands, which they will start to spend, and also to announce and start taking steps towards implementing certain large infrastructure projects. Now, infrastructure projects can have a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year cycles depending on what kind of infrastructure you are spending. But at least the moment you announce, you will also get the private sector excited. When you know the government is going to spend a larger amount on a particular capex, you will also find the private sector participating. So that would have also led to some amount of income creation, some amount of higher income in people's hands, and therefore the demand picking up. Again, those are areas where they could have addressed. Clearly, given the need that the social sector, particularly health, hasn't really held on well in this COVID times, I think there were some low-hanging fruits where probably again the government could have spent, and that could have also spurred certain income creation and certain demand in some segments. So overall, where the areas where they have spent has been on providing liquidity. But as I said, I think there are certain areas where they could actually help in create demand by spending and creating certain infrastructure, which could help both the medium term as well as the longer term.
All right, thanks, Subbu. Nilesh, what would you say, which are the emerging sectors which could be attractive investment opportunities in the current environment?
So, like I said, I mean, the way our portfolio is positioned, we have a large weight in consumer discretionary and financials. Now, again, investors need to be careful where they select very clean companies with large cash on their balance sheet, and companies which will survive the downturn, including in financials where there could be an NPA bubble or NPA creation that can happen over the next 1 year, 18 months. So at least we have a large weight there because these sectors took the maximum impact of the correction, and that is where valuations become cheap. But as the economy rebounds, these are the sectors that will lead the rally as consumer discretionary spends increase, and including financials. That once credit growth picks up, you will see financials start doing really well. So that is where we think there is a large opportunity right now. And we also have a large positioning in utilities, where a lot of these companies are trading at discount to price to book, where they have regulated returns and guaranteed ROEs. Now, because they are public sector undertakings and government has been divesting stake, they have not done that well in terms of return profile. But our sense is, given where dividend yields are and given the kind of earnings growth that we are seeing over the next 2-3 years, perhaps they will catch up at some point in terms of return or delivery of returns where they've not been delivering that great returns over the 2-3 years. So at least based on our portfolio, that is where we think our 3 pockets of opportunity: consumer discretionary, financials, and utilities.
All right, thanks, Nilesh. Subbu, in terms of asset classes, where do you think gold and equities are headed over the next 1 year?
See, gold, as we have always said, it's you should have around 10 to 15% of your allocation in gold, and that really doesn't matter where it goes over the next couple of years, because as we said, that is more long-termish in nature. You can't look at the possible returns on gold to decide. It is an asset which helps you in certain situations, particularly where risk levels are high. And today the risk levels are high for a variety of reasons. Economy is not doing well, earnings growth could come down, inflation could be high. And in all these situations, historically, we have seen gold do well. So our sense is, don't look at the returns, don't look at what it will generate over the next 6 months or 1 year, but make it as a habit that 10% of your assets or 15% of your assets you will invest in gold. Equities are again a long-term story. I think enough has been said by Nilesh, where it looks like the index looks a little pricey, but there is still some value outside the index. But nevertheless, when there is an outflow of money, whether it is from retail or foreigners, you may see the markets reacting. And that points out to the fact that how long will this liquidity situation continue? How long will the US and Europe or even Japan continue with this huge pumping of money? So that's a question which we don't know. The answer we don't know. So if interest rates move up, if the liquidity is reduced, it will have an impact on equity and equity valuations. So therefore, we are suggesting always to be a little cautious and have a mix of different styles, so that if one doesn't do well, something else will do well. Given the fact that the near term looks a little challenging from an index point of view, from an earnings point of view, we would look at portfolios which is reflecting certain value and also have a long-term horizon. So longer term, positive on equities. Near term, there could be some bumps, and gold should be looked at purely from an asset allocation point of view.
Wonderful. Thanks, Subbu. Nilesh, I think that's the last question for you. Would you suggest investors to invest directly in the stock market, or should they opt for the mutual fund or PMS route?
Yeah, see, I mean, you have to understand the function of a mutual fund. I mean, what are they meant for? So if you are a working professional who doesn't have time to go and research companies, track their annual reports, track their performance, and you cannot select stocks on their own, then you need an expert. And mutual funds were designed as an expert in that field, where you hand over your savings to them and they build a portfolio for you. And they have sort of research teams who track companies, build a portfolio, and hopefully generate decent returns over a period of time. So if you are an individual who can find the companies on your own, research them, track them, and build a portfolio on your own, then you don't need mutual funds. But if you don't have time to do all this, that is where mutual funds come in, and you can allocate money to mutual funds, and in fact allocate across different asset classes, be it gold, be it fixed income, or be it equity, and then not worry about having to track them. You let the experts do their job, and they hopefully generate a decent return over a period of time. Now, PMS is a different kind of animal, where it is a customized portfolio built for each individual based on his risk return profile. But you also have to understand there are tax implications for a PMS. Now, like in a mutual fund, every time a fund buys and sells equities, there is no tax implication. But when you allocate to PMS, every time a fund buys and sells, or a PMS buys and sells stocks on your behalf, the capital gains tax it will have to pay because it is in your individual name. So mutual funds are a lot more tax efficient vehicle than a PMS, but PMS can be a lot more customized for your individual needs. But my sense is, unless you have a very large corpus, multi-crore, I think the mutual fund route is perhaps a bit more suited for you, because the costs of running a PMS might eat away a lot of your returns generated through a PMS route. So at least my advice is a mutual fund will always be a lot more tax efficient and cost efficient than an individual PMS.
Sure, Nilesh. Thank you so much. With that, we've come to the end of the Q&A. So thank you again, Subbu. Thank you, Nilesh.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.